This is a Relay Project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's Tuesday, October 18th. You're locked into Real Talk. Thanks for making time for us. In just a moment, comedian Lisa Baker joins us. Just a short time ago, earlier this year, let me put it. But Lisa was probably one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent, Canadian comedian that's experienced this to this point. A front row heckler flipping a table at her, pint glasses flying. She goes after the heckler. Drama ensues. But of course, this is happening across the United States and around the world. It's something we wanted to talk about. This is content that was prompted in part by a real talker who reached out and said, hey, ever since Will Smith went up on stage at the Oscars and smacked Chris Rock, this has become a more and more prominent problem. It's something we should talk about, and I'm looking forward to Lisa Baker joining us. Plus, National Observer lead columnist Max Fawcett has a new column out this morning. You can read it at nationalobserver.com. He says that Danielle Smith's anti-urban agenda should scare Albertans and worry her fellow conservatives. Now, columnists that use the word scare in the headlines know that they're going to get some attention there, so we'll dig into that with Max. I also want to ask him about Premier Scott Moe's claim that the carbon tax is going to cost Saskatchewan more than $110 billion over the next number of years. And of course, we want to touch on what Premier Doug Ford had to say just yesterday, acknowledging that the Emergencies Act, invoked by the Prime Minister, by the Liberal government during that Ottawa occupation last February-ish, he said it was justified. And Supriya Dwivedi and I joking a few days ago, she wondering aloud, where has Doug Ford been in all of this? I was complimenting him for his ability to kind of stay Teflon through all of this. He wasn't down there. He wasn't prominent. He wasn't in the spotlight, just how he'd like it, right? You remember back then, Ottawa's mayor, Watson, was, of course, in front of the cameras for obvious reasons. His city was under siege. And then you had the Prime Minister talking about it as well. Of course, opposition politicians making hay about it. But where was Doug Ford? He didn't seem to get his hands dirty on it. But yesterday, Johnny, why don't we tee this up to kind of set the tone? He's in front of reporters. You remember the public inquiry's been happening. We've been talking about this on the show. Supriya and I just a short time ago. Finally, Doug Ford in front of the microphones. And so reporters wanted to know exactly where he and, I guess, his PC government stood on whether or not it was the right move for Ottawa to impose.
There's an inquiry going on right now today about the use of the Emergencies Act by the federal government. Many of the witnesses who have testified, residents, businesses, have said that they felt abandoned by the police, the city, the province, and the federal government. So I'm wondering why you're not one of the people who's testifying at this inquiry, but also if you can think back to February, do you think that the federal government was justified in using the Emergencies Act to lift the occupation of downtown Ottawa?
Well, we have some of the top officials with the OPP testifying, and yes, I stood shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister. These folks were camping out, everything from whirlpools, disrupting downtown, disrupting the lives of the people of Ottawa. We work collaboratively with the mayor and the Prime Minister over at the borders. They were holding up $1 billion of trade every single day, getting across our borders. We were getting phone calls from governors. It's unacceptable. Myself and I know the Prime Minister believe in free speech. And if you want to protest, protest. If you want to come down to Queen's Park and do cartwheels. But if you disrupt the lives of the people of Ottawa every single day, disrupt the lives, the economic flow across our borders, I have zero tolerance for it.
There you go. Zero tolerance. So the matter's settled. Doug Ford on the record. He says he thinks it was the right move. What's that going to do for dialogue, in particular among conservatives in Canada? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that. You can send us a note. And then John and I are both keeping an eye on one of the newest live streams that's grabbing global attention. I probably don't have to tell you about the plight of British PM Liz Truss. She's already trending to be the shortest serving prime minister in British history. An embattled government that's seeing all of his economic plans essentially evaporate as they lose support among the not just the elected officials, but the electorate as well. It's been a tough start for Liz Truss, of course, replacing the outgoing Boris Johnson, but this new live stream asks on day 5, can Liz Truss outlast this lettuce? And there's a head of lettuce. A British newspaper has started this live stream on YouTube. Lettuce, they say, John, has a shelf life of approximately 10 days.
No way.
You think longer or shorter?
Shorter.
Shorter than 10?
I buy a head on Sunday. By Friday it's...
Okay. Well, this is good news for Liz Truss then. Because if you take a live look at my screen right now, you can see I am on the live stream. It's as we speak, 3:38 in the afternoon in the UK, and they've got the lettuce dressed up with a nice wig. It's got sort of these accoutrements that you would typically see on a pumpkin. The googly eyes, the happy smile. It's got some sunglasses up on its head. This head of lettuce does a sandwich there. Looks to me to be a cup of coffee and a framed photo of the smiling Liz Truss. This must have been earlier in her tenure. As of right now, they're neck and neck. But perhaps she will outlast this head of lettuce. We'll keep an eye on this over the next number of days, bringing you the hard-hitting reporting and international journalism that you have come to expect from Real Talk. Do you want to load up that other tweet? A British author and with a pretty great sense of humor as well, talking about Liz Truss. This was James Felton just yesterday. Said Liz Truss, British Prime Minister, has hit that sweet spot where she's taking it easy because it's her first few weeks, and she's also phoning it in because it's her last few weeks.
That's a nice spot to be.
That's a nice, sweet spot to be in. Nice. So there you go with Liz Truss. Lisa Baker is coming up in just a moment. But first, of course, we want to remind you that these conversations happen because of amazing sponsors like our friends at Athabasca University. It's Canada's open university, and this is maybe the time of year. I know it's not yet moving on. We're not moving on into 2023 quite yet, but you're going to start thinking about what is my next year look like. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not in October going to start talking about New Year's resolutions, but if you've got a plan to maybe take that degree or master's program, there's no better time than right now. Go to athabascau.ca for more information. Once we start hitting that winter into spring, it's a time of renewal and new opportunities. And Athabasca University is a great option. You can study anytime, anywhere, take as little or as much time as you need to complete the course or program. They are as flexible as you need them to be. So if you've got a winter vacation coming up, no worries. You're in charge of your schedule. You won't miss an exam. You're not going to be studying the entire time you're away. That is the worst. Plus, AU's age demographics a little bit older, bringing years of work experience to their schooling. Never too late to go to school. Head back to school and finish that degree program. You can check them out online today at athabascau.ca. And also a reminder, we're going to tell you every single day you have until November 3rd to get your tickets for the Covenant Foundation Lottery to qualify to have your life absolutely transformed. $2.2 million life-changing luxury. That's the dream home, the grand prize in this year's edition of the Covenant Foundation Lottery in support of course, the Misericordia and Grey Nuns hospitals. But it's not just the beautiful dream home up for grabs. What about a luxury vacation to Turk and Caicos? What about a new Alfa Romeo? What about heli-skiing or a guided fly fishing experience? Of course, there's that chance to win more than $500,000 with the split 50-50 as well, and more. Check them out online at covenantfoundationlottery.ca. Well, you don't have to look far to find evidence of a troubling new trend. Let me show you a couple of headlines right now. In Entertainment Weekly, Patton Oswalt, Whitney Cummings, and more cheer comedian Ariel Elias's response to a beer-throwing, Trump-supporting heckler. Threw a beer at her, the comedian picked it up, chugged it, and went on with her set. Way to handle it. Great job, but that's not something you should have to encounter as a performer. Can we all agree? Or what about this headline here in the New York Post? More comedians getting attacked on stage, like Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle. It's the story of comic Samson McCormick, who was assaulted on stage, punched in the face at the Wind River Resort and Casino in Redding, California. It's not just happening in the United States. Lisa Baker is a nationally touring comedian. She's just completed 2 cross-Canada tours in 2022. She's got 2 comedy albums recorded during the pandemic, featured on Sirius XM. You can find her online across social media at Lisa Baker Comedy. Joining us now live this morning, making her Real Talk debut. Lisa, welcome to the show. It's nice to see your face.
Thanks for having me.
You were brought to our attention, your story and the way that you handled a similar circumstance by a Real Talker that said they'd love to hear from you. Johnny, why don't we roll the video here? And Lisa, most people that are going to hear this on the podcast would be grateful for your play-by-play. Tell us what happened here. When did this all go down? You had a table flipped at you, drinks flying everywhere. What's the deal?
So it was a table that had asked to sit up front, and then they proceeded to just be loud and unruly. People around them were getting upset. And this is the moment, so they were asked to leave. He flips the table at me, and then I come down and get in his face. And then the men just came around, pushed me back. There was glass all over the floor. They were asking me if I'm okay. They want me to kind of stand in one spot so I don't get cut or anything, because I wasn't wearing proper footwear to be walking through glass. And the owner is in there as well, the venue owner. And they immediately removed him, and they had the RCMP show up, and he, I believe, was taken to the drunk tank.
Okay, this is just last month. This was in September. Where was this at?
September 10th.
And where was it?
Sylvan Lake, Alberta.
Sylvan Lake, Alberta. You're originally from Newfoundland. You call Alberta home right now. You consider that your home turf? Is this an unprecedented, at least to that point, unprecedented throughout your career?
Well, I mean, there was a time years ago I did a corporate for a hotel, and there was one of the employees was very very threatening, to the point that the comic I was opening for at the time he got off stage. He was like, I need to go check on her. There's something going on. They had to escort us to our rooms. This guy was very threatening. But otherwise, I haven't experienced it. I've known other comics to experience it. But it's the first time that I've ever experienced that level of violence while I was performing.
You immediately respond. You kind of jump back as the table flies, as the drinks fly. For people listening, let me paint a picture. Like this wasn't like someone in the background. It almost hit you. The table almost hit you. The drinks. I mean, you actually got splashed? It looked like this was close.
I did.
Yeah, this was close.
And it was interesting to hear, because people were saying stuff like, well, what did you say? And I was like, well, what could I have said? And tell me what I could have said to justify that level. Because it was he threw that table. It lifted off the floor, came up onto the stage, knocked the mic stand. Like, there was a bunch of stuff going on. And, it was nothing I said. They were just asked to leave. It was a level of entitlement I've never seen.
Yeah, I mean, people, I guess, might be curious to know, like, what were the events or what was the exchange that led up to something like that. But to ask the question in the sense of what did you say, to me almost seems to be asking a woman being catcalled or a woman that's being sexually harassed, what were you wearing, right? There's always been, and there needs to be an invisible line, like an imaginary glass wall between the stage and the audience, right? I mean, comedians, there's nothing like a live comedy show. You need to be able to take on a heckler. You need to be able to have a bit of fun. If somebody asks to sit in the front row, they're signing up for a certain experience, aren't they, potentially?
Yeah. And honestly, too, like, I had spoken to them because they were sitting in the front, but it was stuff like I had asked a question and they had applauded. I think I had said who's from like Newfoundland, and there was people at that table who happened to be from there, people at the next table. And so I just been like normal, like, oh, where are you from? That kind of thing. But there was nothing that was said that was offensive directed towards them. And so it was really kind of just out of left field when it happened. And I feel like it's entitlement, because people are like, I want to watch comedy, but I want the comedian to say only things that I want them to say.
Yeah.
And I want to behave only how I want to behave. It's at a point now where I feel like people who, if you pay for something, be it, a comedy show, groceries even, because look at the way people are treating retail workers. It's almost like we're not people to them anymore. Like, we owe them something. And if we don't deliver it, they have the right to react however they want.
Do you think, is this, and I don't necessarily believe what I'm about to ask you. I'm not saying that this is the case, but I'm curious for your take. When Will Smith stepped up on stage at the Oscars, when he crossed that line, like metaphorically and literally, and open hand smacked Chris Rock, did that change everything or no?
It was always an issue, but I do feel like it emboldened people for sure. I feel like it definitely set like a precedence where people were like, yeah, no, this is acceptable. Like this is because the amount of people even commenting on that incident who really felt like Will Smith was justified, like just for hitting someone for words, like it just blows my mind.
You got there's a guy online I happen to see that is claiming that he was the guy in the video, and I know that he's been harassing you a little bit. I was kind of doing the match. His photo doesn't seem to match the guy in the video, and I think this guy might be a little bit troubled. But my point, or what I'm making here is that not every comment and not every reply to you has been sympathetic. As a matter of fact, I was reading through some of the feedback, and that's a very gracious way to put it, that you've been receiving. You handle it graciously, but it's pretty brutal. You think that do people kind of, I don't know, do I say inhuman? People see comedians or performers in a bit of a twisted way?
They think it's our entire personalities. Like even if I make content or I tweet or a post or video, whatever, and it's about something, could be something political or something, my opinion on a certain topic, and people are like, oh, just stick to jokes. And it's like, yeah, but you understand that I'm like a whole three-dimensional person who's lived a whole ass life, who's had other experiences outside of what I do for a living. And people just want that one thing from us, and otherwise they just want us to shut up and not have an opinion, not talk about anything. So for the last year, because my social media really blew up over the last year, it's been interesting because I do get a lot of just garbage, and it seems to me that it's honestly the only thing I can see is being a woman also really bothers people.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, because I work with men. Like I have colleagues, my opening act, or someone I'm touring with, and they'll get a bit of it, but they don't get the level that I get. And even like when my opening act is a man, or I go into a place and my fiance is with me, and like I'm setting up, everybody, like they're the default, not me. I'm never the default, even though like I booked the tour and I financed the tour. I'm not the default person ever.
Can we actually, I want to swerve away. Well, no, this is all part of the bigger conversation. It's not a swerve. I was talking to a couple people. Here's a little peek behind the curtain. And we do a Real Talk Roundtable every Friday, and we're talking to a couple people, a couple women. We're working on a roundtable on casual sexism. And one of them is in academia, one of them is in industry, and we're going to put a third panelist together. And this is coming up in the next few weeks type thing. Anyway, so this is a conversation fresh with me. We were having this conversation just yesterday. And they were giving me examples. They said, like, here's one example. I'm not going to spoil it. I want people to hear the roundtable. But here's an example of casual sexism here. And, you must experience it all the time. Like
constantly.
Okay, so take us into it, because I think that this is all part of the reason, right? This is all part of the reason why someone feels emboldened. There's got to be several contributing factors. I would imagine that inebriation has to be one of them. I hope.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't hope, but you know what I'm saying. Like if he wasn't hammered, then he's a real asshole. But
right.
Right. But there's like you said, I mean, sex, and there's got to be a big factor at play here.
Yeah, because I don't feel like he would have done that if, like, my opening act kind of looks like a biker most of the time. He's got the hand tattoos as well, and sleeves. And I feel like if he had been on stage, he probably wouldn't have had a table thrown at him. And then to see the man's reaction when I get in his face, because he flinches a few times, and it's like, okay, what did you think was going to happen? Did you think you were going to throw the table at me and I was going to cry and people were going to clap? So I feel like just even that, him thinking that I was, I guess, not going to react to that, blew my mind. I've had, our last tour was called Boats and Hoes. And the amount, like, one woman really went off on me because she was like, that is so disrespectful to call the tour that. And I can't believe you're sharing this, like you're going to do these shows with this man who has such little respect for you that he would call the tour Boats and Hoes. And I was like, ma'am, respectfully, you might want to check your own internalized misogyny, because he's the opening act. I'm the person who put the tour together, who financed the tour and named the tour. Don't act like the only time I'm getting on stage is when a man invites me, okay? And so it just blows my, it's just assumed all the time.
Can I ask, like, how did the comedy club handle this? And bigger picture conversations you're having with your colleagues, like, what's the appropriate response from a venue?
I mean, well, this venue was it's actually a restaurant, a pub in Sylvan Lake. They let me come in and do a show, because I typically book him with local businesses. I used to be a Yucks comedian. I quit back in April. And it's because I want to be independent. I want to be able to, I take the door most of the time. So they're not getting, because they take way too much of a cut. And so I just felt like it was unfair. And this club was wonderful. This venue was amazing. The owner was in there. They apologized. They're the ones that sent me the security footage. They were incredibly supportive, as were the audience members. But there have been clubs, and there's a article from a few years back regarding a comic at Niagara Falls, Yuck Yucks, who was, aggressively heckled on stage. And then she asked the club, like, why didn't you handle this? Like, once you see, we can handle it, but at some point the club has to step in. At some point the club has to realize that, yes, okay, this particular table might be spending a lot of money, but so are the tables around them. I'd rather lose one than lose 10, that are never going to come back because they felt like, their experience didn't matter to the venue. The venue didn't remove the troublemakers. And in that case, she lost work. And she's not the first comic to have that happen where, there was an incident of extreme heckling or violence. There's been comics who've had things thrown at them on stage. Darren Frost had glasses thrown at him on stage and lost work because of it. And it's because, these venue owners, at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, I guess, like, but are you really hurt? And like, they spent a lot of money. And it just blows my mind that our safety is not even a consideration.
You're talking, this is Christina Walkinshaw, right?
Yes.
Is the comedian you're talking about? This is back in
Yes.
2013, coming up on 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I think the details of this are especially relevant. It feels a little bit weird for me to say it out loud on the show, but basically, so you want to say what people were yelling at her?
Yeah, they were yelling like, show us your tits and show us your bush or whatever, like just being very aggressive.
Yeah. And then she loses the gig.
Yeah, she lost the rest of the weekend. And it's happened before to comics where, they lose gigs, they lose not just that weekend, but like upcoming bookings. And, there's a lot of venues out there and a lot of clubs that really will support their acts, that will 100% have our backs, but not all of them. And unfortunately for many comics, they still have to work for those venues, even knowing their safety is not a concern to them because they need the income.
Man, oh man. So where do you want this public conversation to go? Like, I saw one comment on here. I think it was from Sheriff or something like that on our live chat's churning right now, which is awesome. But somebody I would imagine, and hey, let me say this, we spent a weekend of our family's summer in Sylvan Lake, and I know that Sylvan Lake right now, people that are living in Sylvan Lake are going, oh, shit, right?
Oh, yeah, no, they were lovely.
Yeah.
Those people are lovely.
And so I scrolled back here, and Cactus Sheriff says, when judging a community, remember to look at how many people immediately jumped in to stop the situation, which is a great point too. But like with regards to when people are going to hear this and people are going to talk about this interview and what happened to you, where do you want this conversation to go?
Because this happens everywhere. And I don't want people to focus on where exactly it happened. Because the people of Sylvan Lake were mad. This was the talk of the town. All those people jumped in. I never felt more safe. But this happens literally everywhere. And what we need to do is, when there's like venues, if you're going to host a comedy show, whether it's your regular thing or you're doing a one-off, you need to ensure, like, you need to be part of that organization of keeping that show running smoothly and ensure the comic safety, just like you would any other employee. And then people, like the public in general, we need to be like holding people accountable. So like if somebody is, because a lot of times they won't listen to me if they're really, really kind of, hell-bent on just shitting on me while I'm on stage. But if you have a man or a table full of people lean over and say, hey, we need you to stop, like you're ruining the show. People will often then they will stop. They will stop what they're doing. But again, we need people to just kind of start holding each other accountable. We used to do that all the time. We used to be, if somebody was just, being a dink in public, you'd call them out. And like now everyone, and I get why people are afraid, but a lot of times people are braver. They appear braver than they actually are.
Yeah. I'm not a comedian, certainly. but I do a lot of public events and I do a lot of event hosting and something like this. I mean, I remember even, I'm certainly not comparing myself to Chris Rock. I've never hosted anything like the Oscars. But when that happened, you do wonder, you kind of think about it. You go, what would I do in a circumstance like that? Like, the stuff that people will say to me on Twitter, rarely to my face, like, what if I was at an event? What if I was at a charity fundraiser, publicizing where I was going to be, announcing my location, and somebody that had an axe to grind came up and wanted to knock my teeth out? Like, what would I do? It's something that I didn't used to think about 10 years ago.
Well, for me too, like if I'm performing somewhere, it's nothing to even follow us after a show. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the venue or in the parking lot. Like people, like we're so easy to find and it's so scary when you think about it that way. And I think that's the thing. People need to stop. Like if you're sitting there and you're going to comment on a video of that nature, with what did you say? Like just stop. Don't comment. Just immediately condemn the behavior. Regardless, just condemn the behavior.
Did you for a second, Lisa, think about, like, I don't want to say quitting, but does it give you pause with regards to whether or not you want to continue to put yourself out there or no?
There are times when I'm like, that office job was decent, like, or maybe I should pull out the work boots and the tools again and go back into no, I wouldn't. I'm certainly always looking for ways to sort of branch off of this. But stand up is where I live. Like I'll always do stand up. I can't not do stand up. So I don't think it would take a lot for someone to make me quit.
Yeah, you'd probably just find yourself out on the job site somewhere chirping people, working on new material, right? Like it's got to find it out. You got to find an outlet. Hey, you were just way up north. I was seeing your tweets. People can follow you on Instagram, Twitter at Lisa Baker Comedy. They can check out your website, lisabakercomedy.com, where they can shop for your new album. They can check out your upcoming shows. They can book you. It looked to me like you had a pretty great time up there in a part of the country that a lot of people don't get to go explore.
No, it was incredible. I got to go to Yellowknife. I've been there a few times, but I got to go to a Iqaluit and Nunavut for the first time. And then in November, I'm going to Whitehorse. So by the end of this year, I'll have done stand-up in every province and territory in Canada.
That's incredible.
And Iqaluit, that was the tough one. So I've got it done, and I'm already looking forward to going back.
Love it.
Amazing.
Love it. Well, listen, from the minute, like I got to choose my words carefully here because I don't want to say I loved the video from the moment I saw it because there's nothing to love about people harassing and assaulting performers and flipping tables and things like that. But like there's something, the way that you're hardwired, you could see like you were just fierce. And I love, like, my favorite part of what you did is you kind of drew back and kind of did the fake punch and Buddy flinched. I was like, atta girl, there you go. I loved it. Now, of course, I hope it never happens again. But you've got a great energy and I'm grateful that you made time to talk to us today, Lisa.
I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, there you go. That's Lisa Baker. You check her out again at lisabakercomedy.com. John, you've done a lot of public events.
I thought you were going to say comedy.
Have you done any comedy? Did you ever do any like media nights, any comedy festivals or anything like that? You ever put yourself out there on stage?
I do comedy every day here in the studio. You know that. I make you laugh.
Your valuable one-liners.
Keep your spirits up.
You ever seen anything like that in person?
I haven't, and it is true. It's getting worse. And, some of the Dave Chappelle, whether you agree with what is being said or not, it seems like comedy was always this window, this place where we could, you're going to say things that are offensive, but they're jokes. And I know a lot of jokes can hurt sometimes. Sometimes they go too far. But in the end, I like that there's a safe space for people to say what they want. And in the end, most of the time, they're being lighthearted. They're taking a joke because they want you, even the person they're making fun of, to laugh. So the fact that comedians now have to think when they're writing stuff like, oh, well, I got a beer bottle thrown at me for this. Is it going to be like the president now? Like everyone's behind glass when they're doing a comedy set? Like it's the whole thing about a comedy set is the intimate experience you have with the people there, being close, being able to smell them, see them, feel them breathe. And then, even when heckling happens, it used to just be words. And then the comedian has a chance, hey, here's a chance for me to spin this.
Totally.
To get into it with this heckler, maybe even win them over most of the time if you're a funny person. And it's sort of changed where I was watching some live comedy show the other night, and some people just avoid the hecklers now because why draw them in? Because they could get angry. They could get on stage.
It's like, how's a comedian supposed to handle heckling? right? Like you said, sometimes heckling, most times heckling makes a comedian look good. The heckler rarely emerges as the star. But at the same time, heckling derails a show, right? It's rarely welcomed by the audience.
No.
You don't typically see the fellow audience members grateful that the heckler is chiming in with their brand of comedy.
They didn't pay for the heckler.
But at the same time, I feel like, we're to a point now where if comedians have to start second guessing, if they have to start choosing the words carefully because they're afraid somebody's going to flip a table, then it's going to change comedy. This has been part of what you sign up for to enter a comedy club. It's why, like, when you're on a first date, that sense of like when you get picked for something on the playground and your stomach sinks because it's a high pressure scenario and you were hoping someone else would get picked, or the teacher calls on you in the classroom to answer the question and you don't quite know. For me, it was anything to do with math. I never wanted to be picked, and that sense of relief you feel when someone else gets picked. It's like when a comedian hones in. How about you, sir? Where are you from? What's this? So it's a first date. Oh, it's a first date. How's he doing? And you're going, thank God she's not talking to me. Right? But it's part of what you've signed up for. And typically as an audience member, if you handle it well, you might have a little fun poked at your expense. Sometimes a zinger, sometimes something that might even be a little bit hurtful. But that's not to say that emboldens someone or should give the green light for a violent interaction. I mean, I feel like maybe we're saying something that's a little bit obvious here, but it's an undeniable trend. And like Lisa said in a recent tweet, it's certainly not limited to the United States. And here's an example of it happening right here in Alberta.
And the person, if you watch this video again, there's a woman, like, he's with this woman and he disregards her. Watch this woman. She's getting up. She's clearly drunk. She falls. He looks at her. He doesn't care. Now she gets almost trampled. Yes. And this is the woman he's with. Like, he doesn't give any regard for her. So this person clearly is not.
Yeah. His haircut kind of says
guy.
it all, doesn't it? Right? Business in the front, party in the back. The old mullet.
Again, alcohol playing a huge factor here, you can tell.
Yeah.
So what do we do? Do we limit drinks like at comedy clubs now? Do we?
And I mean, someone on the live chat said, I can't find it right now. My apologies. Basically said something which is here it is from Tony, who says, whatever happened to cutting off somebody who's getting obviously intoxicated or not letting somebody in if they're obviously drunk? It's tough to say. I've worked as a bartender. Table. It's one thing if somebody's on their 16th shot of Don Julio, then it's one thing. But maybe Buddy had a Mickey of vodka in the parking lot before coming in.
Know.
Maybe Buddy's got anger issues. Maybe, but like these things can fly under the radar and you don't know. And there certainly is the onus on bartenders and venue managers to not overserve. But let's be honest also, like, the real talk, like, it's a business and typically they're going to sell as many drinks as they can to people so long as the people don't become unruly. Maybe now comedy clubs, like, I'm trying to think of the last comedy club I went to. There was someone at the door, I'm pretty certain. Typically there's someone in there keeping an eye on things, but maybe you need a couple of security guards in front of the stage at every venue now. I don't know. I mean, it's increased cost for the venue.
And what does that do to the vibe too? There are two guys standing on the side of the stage and then limiting, like, alcohol's not an excuse either. Everyone likes to have a few Dingleheimers at the comedy club.
Dingleheimers? What goes into a Dingleheimer? Is that sort of a German liqueur?
Secret sauce. We'll have one at the Christmas party.
I can ask Max Fawcett if he's ever seen anything like this in just a second. Lead columnist from Canada's National Observer is going to join us. But first, I want to remind you exactly why the Jesperson family feeds our two pups, Moses and Monroe, Grand Dog Essentials quality raw food. We have been doing business with Grand Dog Essentials for years, way before they started doing business with Real Talk, and it's because we've seen the health impacts, the positive effects of raw food in both of our dogs' health. They've got not just the quality raw food, but supplements as well. What about the healing powers of mushrooms? What about your dog going yeast-free? Is there an ear infection problem? Maybe itchy paws? You're going to want to look into that yeast protective coating. You're going to want to look into yeast-free. It's a supplement that they sell. Fruit and veggies, adding that to your food. That's information you're going to find on their blog. I guess the point I'm getting at is they understand holistic health. At granddog.ca, you can shop, you can read their blog, you can learn more about the benefits of quality raw food, and if you use the promo code REALTALK, you'll save 10% off your first-time order delivered right to your door. So convenient. in Calgary, Edmonton, and central Alberta. Our friends at Kubi Energy, of course, you know what's coming. Winter's coming, and it means that people are going to be using more power, more energy. Electricity rates are up. It's a better time now than ever before to visit kubienergy.ca and get a quote on going solar at home. This Canada Greener Homes grant means that you can tap into a loan up to $40,000 interest-free from the feds. Take 10 years to pay it off. But here's the thing. With these programs, sometimes it takes time. We got to do the drawings, got to do the renderings, got to get the loan approved. So if you want your install to go first thing in the spring, once that snow melts, you're going to want to visit kubienergy.ca today. Don't forget Positive Reflections, the first show of every week. We fill our buckets, courtesy of our friends at Kubi Energy. At Eden Landscaping, it's the same deal. Yeah, they're not going to break ground on your brand new patio. They're not going to get started on your water feature in the middle of December. We all know that. But there's the real property report they got to pull. There's the special. You want to add this. You want to make your project happen with some of the construction materials that are unique, that take a little longer to get here, especially with strains on the supply chain. It's why you want to get in touch with Mike and his team today at Eden Landscaping. They've got a full service portfolio: excavation, retaining walls, brick, natural beauty, stunning stonework, you name it, they've done it. From the ultra-modern to the classic looks. You can see their portfolio online at landscapeedmonton.ca. And before we get to Max, I want to remind you about Apex Automation's call to professional engineers across the country. What's so special about Apex Automation? Well, let me tell you, they're putting their people first. They understand that they understand the professional engineers across the country are looking for more than just a decent salary. They want to feel fulfilled. They want to give people their time back. They want to have more time to be closer to their families. That's why Apex is opening offices close to where their clients are across Western Canada, so their staff, their team members can be home with their families at night. If you're ready for a change, if you know what you bring to the table and you want to be reciprocated value-wise, check out apexautomation.ca today. Max Fawcett is the lead columnist for Canada's National Observer. We're going to talk to him about the carbon tax today. We're going to talk to him about Premier Danielle Smith's first week in office. I want to ask him about Doug Ford and the Emergencies Act and a whole lot more. But first, Max, real life, real conversation. You ever been in a comedy venue or anywhere else where a performer was heckled or somebody crossed the line like we just saw with comedian Lisa Baker there?
I haven't been in a comedy club, sadly, in far too long. But I know this is a concern for them now. I listen to a bunch of podcasts of comedians. One of my favorite is Bill Burr, and he's talked about this, about how it's just a different dynamic now after the whole Will Smith thing. It seems like there's a permission structure in place to cross a line, and it's funny because heckling is part of the vibe of a comedy club. There's always that interaction between performer and audience that is part of the magic in some respects. I think some of my favorite moments in comedy, and admittedly some of these I've watched on YouTube, but it's comedians kind of clapping back at hecklers. But if you're worried that the heckler is going to come up on stage and actually interact with you physically, that changes the whole vibe. So it's a shame that that's happening.
There's a difference, obviously, between these things happening in person, like happened at the comedy club there in Sylvan Lake, and this happened across the United States and elsewhere, and what happens online. But I think that the two go hand in hand when we start talking about root causes, or sort of the permissions that people feel that they've been granted, or how people become emboldened. To say the very least, you've got your fair share of critics online. Have you adjusted or amended your approach to clapping back over the last 6 or 12 or 24 months?
That's a good question. A little bit. I really do try. I know my people who don't like me will not agree with this, but I do try to sort of stay in the lane of facts, of responding with information, of asking questions, of not getting personal. But I try to not interact with American accounts with high numbers of followers, just because you can spend days dealing with the stream of trolls that comes from it. I think if you're respectful, and respectful can still be tough, right? You can be tough and respectful. You can be questioning and respectful. But as long as you're respectful, I think you have reason to expect the same. And then when you don't get that, you have the high ground. I would note that despite still being blocked by Premier Danielle Smith, I've never been disrespectful to her personally, in the way that she says other people have. So I think that's sort of the approach that you need to take.
Hey, I'm assuming that you saw my conversation with her. It was the first sit down that she granted here on Real Talk, the first one we did in this new studio, and your name came up specifically. She said she was going to unblock you. It hasn't happened yet. I mean, by name, she said she was going to unblock you. Are you advocating to see it happen?
I mean, I don't really care. Like, I can still see the things she's saying. I can still respond to her ideas. I have a column. I have a platform. So, it's fun for me. But I do think it's a bad sign when a public official is blocking people for asking questions they don't like, because not everyone has a column. Not everyone gets to appear on your wonderful show. And they have a right to ask questions and be heard, I think. And as long as they're being respectful, as long as they're not calling names and using slurs, I really don't think that politicians should be blocking their constituents and the people that they're elected to represent.
We've got I don't know if you saw this, but there is a British newspaper, Daily Star, has put out this live stream. You can watch it on YouTube. Day 5. Can Liz Truss outlast this head of lettuce? And they want to see if her tenure as British PM will last longer than this dressed up head of lettuce. I wonder if you could come up with some sort of a live stream, maybe using like some sort of a local bit of produce, or maybe some sort of local food stuff. A perishable is what I'm getting at, and see how long it might take for you to become unblocked by the Premier's Twitter account. That could be some engaging content. Maybe we could host it here on the Real Talk channel.
It'd be fun, but we'd need to use like a gourd or something, because I think it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
We need something that's going to age over months.
A gourd, yeah.
not days.
Yeah, that's well. The good news is that they're abundant right now at supermarkets like your local Friesen Brothers. There you go. So people can pick that up. Hey, let's get into some of the actual real down to business stuff that you've been working on. I said this in my opening comments today. Your column out today at nationalobserver.com. Danielle Smith's anti-urban agenda should scare Albertans and worry her fellow Conservatives. Now, at risk of coming across as a fearmonger, may I ask you, sir, to please justify invoking the word scare? Let's get into it.
Sure. Our cities, Edmonton and Calgary, but also, Medicine Hat, Red Deer, all these other cities in Alberta, they're the lifeblood of our province, of our economy, of our cultural scenes, of almost every walk of life and thing that drives this province forward, absent agriculture, which is crucially important. And I think we hear about that all the time, but cities matter in the 21st century. Cities are what attracts talent. Cities are what creates tax revenue. And when you have a premier who is essentially saying, well, I'm just going to write off the 2 biggest cities in my province and collect enough votes in the rest of the province to win, that's a problem. That's a problem economically. That's a problem in terms of the province's long-term competitiveness. And it should worry people, just as if you had a premier who said, well, I'm going to write off rural Alberta and we don't care about those people. We don't need their votes. That would be worrying too. And I would note that, as much as the NDP doesn't do well there, I don't think they've ever said anything like that. I don't think they've said the votes out there don't matter. We don't care. We don't need them. I think they'd like to have them. But for Danielle Smith to lay out her sort of calculus and just say, I don't need y'all, I've got enough votes elsewhere to win, betrays a spirit that is not in keeping with leadership. Leadership is you lead for all people, you serve all people, even if they didn't vote for you. And to tell millions of Albertans, I don't even need your vote, it's not authoritarian, but it's undemocratic, I would say.
I remember a specific sit down that I had. I didn't get hauled into the office too often in my previous employ on that terrestrial radio station, but I do remember being called in to the boss's office on one occasion after I had read through our text line, which is always like jumping into a pit of vipers. But I had jumped into the text line and I was reading some of the comments live on the air, and one was particularly aggressive. And I wasn't able to speak on that radio station like I am here, so I couldn't invite the person to kindly fuck off or what have you. So I simply invited them to shut off the radio station, to erase it from their presets, and to forget us forever. And I remember my boss reminding me that from a business standpoint, that was rather self-defeating. And he invited me to refrain from continuing that approach or making that a trend, asking people to forget about the radio station and turn it off forever. it kind of feels like the strategy that the premier is going with to a certain degree. And so, yeah, sure, like you say, maybe it should scare Albertans. But if I'm an MLA or a current minister in Calgary, if I'm a conservative voter that would like to see the UCP hold government, if I'm a Danielle Smith staffer, I'm wondering about the strategy here too. It sounds to me, as you write, I mean, I'll use your words, a form of political suicide.
Sure feels that way. I mean, if you wanted to get rid of whatever vestiges of the Alberta PCs that were left in the United Conservative Party, this is a good way to do it because, the PCs are overwhelmingly located still in the cities. Sort of seems like she wants to recreate Wild Rose with the UCP banner. But yeah, look, I don't think people would think of me as a Jason Kenney fan, but to his credit, his campaign in 2019 and his government ever, for the years that he was in charge of it, tried to speak to all Albertans. It spoke to Albertans in Calgary. It spoke to Albertans in Edmonton, not always effectively, but it tried. And it certainly spoke to Albertans in rural parts of the province. He did not segment his message by geography. It was sort of a pan-Albertan prosperity message. And this just feels needlessly sort of segmented and unambitious, it's obviously she's not going to win as many seats in Calgary as Jason Kenney did. That's fine. You can acknowledge that and say we hope to compete for those seats. We may not win them all, but we're certainly going to try. But to just say to Rick Bell, like, yeah, we don't need those seats. Fuck them. It is just must be so demoralizing if you're like you said, a staffer, an MLA, a minister, a volunteer, someone who's been with the party for years, maybe who helped like create the party as a volunteer. And now to hear your leader say, yeah, I don't really need your support. It's got to be really disheartening.
Yeah. And I'm also like, I approach my words carefully because I don't want to, let me say, like, my family, the tradition is rich in agriculture, and there's tech and innovation and entrepreneurial drive in agriculture. And I know that. So let me be clear. I'm not making the point that I think that all business and all innovation and all economic activity happens in the cities. That's not the point I'm making. But there's a ton of innovation in business that happens in the cities. The cities are oftentimes what draws workers from across Canada and around the world. The cities are often what young families target as a great place to live and raise their families. And to me, just with regards to like strategy, let's say attracting international investment as an example, it seems like a dangerous strategy on that front as well. Like not everything. We talked to the strategists about this on our Real Talk Roundtable on Friday, presented by Urban Timbers. It's like it's not all just political strategy, right? Governing also is communicating your plan to the general population so they understand what the landscape looks like. You want to not just, I don't want to say placate. You don't want to just empower people to feel as though their investment here is smart. You want to attract it. And this seems to me to be closing the door on some pretty huge opportunities at a time when Alberta has been trending in a really positive direction.
Yeah, I think Zane made a very good point in that conversation. It's that she's still talking and behaving like she's a pundit and not the premier, right? And her comments maybe make sense if you're a pundit or you're someone who's sort of doing internal party math. But as the premier of the entire province, you need to speak to and try to lead the entire province. And absolutely, if you're a business that's looking to relocate head offices to Calgary, there's been a bunch of recent announcements, WestJet. I think there was a tech company called Infosys. Like there's been a lot of good news in Calgary. But if you're a good news announcement in the pipeline and you hear that the premier of the province doesn't really care for Calgary and wants to put rural Alberta first, aren't you going to press pause on that decision? Aren't you going to maybe reassess and wait until she's been in government for a year and, see if there's a Liz Truss moment? There's just so much uncertainty that these sorts of comments throw into a situation that doesn't need to be uncertain. And like you said, with all this good news happening lately for the province, what an odd way to kind of, put a spanner in the works.
I want this conversation to be a tale of three premiers. And so let's move just a little bit east to Saskatchewan. Premier Scott Moe releasing a policy paper claiming that the federal government's climate and environmental policies are going to cost Saskatchewan $111 billion over the next 12 years, about $9 billion a year. A cost. He says he will affirm and advance Saskatchewan's constitutional authority and autonomy within Canada. Kind of a common theme, in particular with conservative premiers across the country. What do you make of the numbers? What do you make of the claim? What do you make of the policy paper? Where do you land on this?
I mean, I'm dying to know if there are any public servants who worked on this policy paper, because on some level they should have to resign on the basis of what's in this. This is so ludicrously bad in terms of its math, in terms of its assumptions. Like, this would get thrown out of a first-year university class for being just ridiculously stupid. So, let's go into the numbers a little bit. $111 billion in costs. Well, guess what Scott Moe's government forgot to include in that? The carbon tax rebate, which exists, which is real. I know some people don't want to believe it or can't find it on their bank statements, and certainly that's on the federal government. But 25 billion out of that 111 gets knocked out, according to University of Calgary's Trevor Tombe. There's 25 billion there he's just forgetting about. There's the cost of the electric car situation. He seems to assume that every electric car for the foreseeable future will cost $20,000 more than every other car, and people are going to keep paying that. He doesn't account for the fact that electric cars have lower operating costs. Like, there's just so many obviously biased assumptions built into this report. It should be dismissed on its face, and quite frankly, he should be ridiculed for it. Now, what did Trevor Tombe say? He said, yes, there's a cost to climate action. Maybe it's in the order of $10 to $20 billion over the course of the period he talks about here. So let's talk about the real cost, but we also should be talking about the cost of not doing anything. Saskatchewan is an agricultural province. It will be affected by climate change just as much as any other province, perhaps more than any other province. And so, let's have a serious grown-up conversation about this stuff. Yes, there is a cost to taking action on climate change, but it is not this ludicrously inflated cost. And the cost of not taking action is not zero. It would be nice if we can have an adult conversation about this stuff. I know that sort of sounds like wishful thinking in the year 2022, but I still cling to the fact that public officials should have to stay within the bounds of reality and should have to use numbers that are at least somewhat connected to the real world.
Johnny, I wonder if that should be our new billboard, Real Talk, your home for adult conversations.
I think we'd get the wrong kind of response. The wrong community would be drawn in there, but good idea. Yeah.
Right. Oh, you're thinking more NC-17. Yeah. Max, this is, we were talking about the tomato soup on Van Gogh's sunflowers. And do you have a take on that, by the way? The act of protest, the act of demonstration? Do you have a hot take on that? We spent yesterday talking about it.
I don't know if it's hot. I mean, climate activists are often their own worst enemy. And this is just proof of that. Like, this doesn't raise anyone's awareness about anything other than your own stupidity. And young people have every right to be stupid. It's part of being young. But, if you're trying to advance the cause of climate change and climate policy, throwing soup at a priceless work of art that has nothing to do with climate change, just about the dumbest way you could do it. It's sort of the equivalent of people who block morning traffic, who delay people getting to work to raise awareness about climate change. All you've done is piss those people off. You've raised their awareness of your terribleness, right? That is not a effective way to advocate for your policies and your solutions. But just as people have the right to free speech, they have the right to be silly and stupid, and they'll pay the price for this, I'm sure, in some way or another.
Well, this is it's a very real expression of how some people feel. I mean, you can see the tomato soup dripping off the frame. It's a visceral type of expression, whereas conversations around, let's say, the carbon tax or effective policy comes across as, and I'm not saying it's not real, but it's a little more academic. You know what I mean? And I've seen you make statements. In fact, I think you just tweeted at the former principal secretary of the PM, Gerald Butts, just yesterday. You said something like carbon tax was excellent policy, horribly communicated. And I wanted to ask you about this. With the carbon tax set to rise, we see Pierre Poilievre talking about how the carbon tax is set to triple, and cost of living skyrocketing right now. Groceries at an all-time high. I haven't even talked about Galen Weston and the others talking about freezing their prices, but they're freezing them at the all-time high, which is a bit of an own, in a way, a cell phone, if you will, from a messaging standpoint. What needs to change? Like, policy can be good, but if communicated poorly or if rolled out, I don't even want to say this because I know what you're going to say in response, but if rolled out at the wrong time or at an inconvenient time, and people are screaming at their speakers right now, what do you mean at the wrong time? The planet's burning, the temperatures are rising. but so is the cost of living. And that's real to people. The visceral feeling of having to pick and choose which bills you're going to pay every month. How could it be better implemented? How could it be better communicated? What if you were calling the shots?
Well, I mean, I think right now the government is in for a penny, in for a pound on this stuff. It's going to be really hard for them to reverse course for any number of reasons. But I've been saying this for 5 or 6 years now. I feel like I worked in the Alberta Climate Change Office, learned some very, very important lessons there. Worked with some very, very smart people, much smarter than I am, around policy design, and they designed policies that I still believe in, and they were the template for the federal carbon tax, the smartest climate policy I think we've seen in the Western world. From a policy perspective, from a political perspective, I think they've made themselves needlessly vulnerable. There was a preference for economic efficiency over political durability. And I think in hindsight, making policies that were more politically durable would have been a better choice. So you look at the United States and the Inflation Reduction Act. They didn't do carbon taxes because I think they looked at Canada and said, oh no, that's putting a giant bullseye on this policy that we need to be in place in perpetuity. Instead, they did regulations, subsidies, tax credits, stuff that people can't really get too excited about because they don't see it on their gas bill every day. And I think those policies, they're less efficient, but they may be more durable and more effective. So, with the carbon tax rebate federally, first they did it as a deduction on your income taxes. Big mistake. Most people don't understand a lot of the deductions on their income taxes. Many people have people do it for them who may not tell them about it. And they didn't even call it the carbon tax rebate. They called it the climate action incentive. Very poor language. They finally sort of got the memo on this and started doing direct deposits this year. The first one I think we got in July, the last one we just got last week. But again, the language problem. So some people's bank accounts, it says carbon tax or climate action incentive. Some people, it says CAI. I think, sometimes it says EFT Credit Canada. In one case, it says not climate action incentive.
What?
Believe it or not. Yeah. Because they didn't force the banks to all communicate it the same way. They gave them free hand to sort of describe it as they chose. And I think they're remedying that now. They've reached out to the banks and said, you have to all describe it the way we want you to describe it. But the ship has sailed. People are confused. I can't tell you how many people on Twitter I've had to sort of walk through, here's where you find your carbon tax rebate.
I've seen
and they
you do
go,
it.
I've never gotten it. And then I show them and they go, oh, okay, fair enough. Like,
yeah, I think a couple people have also exposed themselves as to not having filed their taxes yet, which is also, probably that. But it could also be something like, I know I'm not dumbing it down. This is comms policy these days. This is strategy these days. Put the Prime Minister on a TikTok video. Put the Prime Minister on an Instagram live being like, hey, everybody. Hey, Canada, what's up? It's JT. Check your tax returns. Check your notice of assessment. Check your, it just to me seems to be a pretty obvious way. Maybe I'm dumbing it down. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but communication strategy doesn't always have to be super high level and trickling down. Sometimes you got to meet the people where they're at. Where are the loudest critics? The people that aren't watching the 24-hour cable news cycle, the people that aren't necessarily always downloading Real Talk every day to their own intellectual peril. I think sometimes that politicians need to better understand how to hit people where they're at.
And conservatives understand this. This is probably their greatest political strength, is they find a simple message track and then they just beat it to death, right? They stay on it. They repeat it. Kenny did that jobs economy pipeline, and you can mock it, but it worked. And now Poilievre is on it with tripling the carbon tax, and it's deceitful. It's a little bit dishonest, but it works. People are picking up on it. And, on the other side, the Alberta NDP, when I worked there in the government, they ran away from their own message. They didn't talk about the carbon tax rebate. They were shy about it because I think they understood that it was not a winner for them. Same thing is happening at the federal level. The Liberals do not talk about it enough. They've started to pick up the volume, but it's at this point, the ship is way out of the harbor. What they should have done from day one is send people physical checks, right? Yes, it's inefficient. Yes, some people will criticize you for creating greenhouse gas emissions the way they criticize the Prime Minister when he travels, but forcing people to go and cash a check that says carbon tax rebate, and there's a letter inside explaining where it comes from and why it's great, people would not be confused the way they are now. And I think the policymakers in the federal government kind of were allowed to drive the bus a little bit too much and the communications people were not present in the room nearly as often.
Okay,
as they should have been.
This is a party game, and it's too easy. This is elementary level party game. But you talk about catchphrases and effective messaging. I want to see how long it takes you to identify the politician who campaigned on gravy train.
Doug Ford.
Nailed it. Let's move to Ontario. Doug Ford yesterday taking a question, sort of not, I guess, finally talking about the feds invoking the Emergencies Act. I actually was telling Supriya last week, I thought it was amazing strategy on Doug Ford's part to just stay out of it. I'm not saying that was best for the people, but I thought from a political standpoint, he saw that convoy coming from 1,000 kilometers away and said, I don't want to get my boots or hands dirty on this one.
There's
Finally, yesterday, here he is.
Now, today, about the use of the Emergencies Act by the federal government. Many of the witnesses who have testified, residents, businesses, have said that they felt abandoned by the police, the city, the province, and the federal government. So I'm wondering why you're not one of the people who's testifying at this inquiry, but also if you can think back to February, do you think that the federal government was justified in using the Emergencies Act to lift the occupation of downtown Ottawa?
Well, we have some of the top officials with the OPP testifying, and yes, I stood shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister. These folks were camping out, everything from whirlpools, disrupting downtown, disrupting the lives of the people of Ottawa. We worked collaboratively with the mayor and the Prime Minister over at the borders. They were holding up $1 billion of trade every single day, getting across our borders. We were getting phone calls from governors. It's unacceptable. Myself and I know the Prime Minister believe in free speech. And if you want to protest, protest. If you want to come down to Queen's Park and do cartwheels. But if you disrupt the lives of the people of Ottawa every single day, disrupt the lives, the economic flow across our borders, I have zero tolerance for it.
Yeah. Were you surprised?
I wasn't, because, Doug Ford, I don't think a whole lot of him as a premier, but as a politician, he's probably the smartest and most effective politician in Canada today. He reads situations, I think, more effectively, especially given that he's a conservative and sort of has a certain, certainly on this issue, a certain level of blinders on, but he sees through it, right? He sees trouble with the convoy, and he sees that people are either going to look to the city of Ottawa or the federal government to blame. They're not going to figure out to blame the province, because the province is sort of the meat in the jurisdictional sandwich, right? Like, it's in the middle. People don't really see it. So he understood that he can kind of hang back and get away with this and let the chips fall where they may, that there was no upside for him in either embracing or vocally opposing. But there's a lesson here. Like, Pierre Poilievre should be looking at everything Doug Ford does politically and saying, should I be doing the same thing? Because that guy's won 2 elections, and I'm not really polling as high as I should be. Poilievre is very, very close to this thing, too close, I think. And if bad things keep coming out of this inquiry, it's going to stick to him. And, Doug Ford understands that he showed this throughout the pandemic, whether it's Chrystia Freeland or the Prime Minister. It's okay to hug the feds sometimes. There is advantage in them having your back and you having their back. And I think there's a lesson there for other conservative politicians in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily 100% convinced that you're right about Pierre Poilievre in the sense that, and let me just develop the thought quickly, it's kind of the same as this gamble that we're talking about with Premier Danielle Smith, in that they've identified their base, they've crunched the numbers, they've got their strategy, and they believe that if they can hold that down, if they can lock that support down, that they can win. And the worst thing that they could possibly do would be to walk back or dilute the messaging. And Pierre Poilievre just doubled the membership of the Conservative Party by refusing to apologize for the convoy. In fact, for doubling down on his support of the convoy. Now, whether or not that's going to work in a general election, I don't know, but I don't ignore what I see around me, and that is this energy that Pierre Poilievre is infusing into what was, quite frankly, a stagnant party under Aaron O'Toole and under Andrew Scheer.
Okay, but where does a lot of that support come from, right? Many of those signups were from Saskatchewan and Alberta. The biggest sign-up ridings sort of were disproportionately on the prairies, where, guess what? the Conservatives already hold all but 2 seats. So he can amp up the energy in the Conservative Party and the prairies all he wants. It's not going to help him form government. The path to government is formed through the 905 region in Toronto, and Doug Ford is the master of the 905 region. He understands that part of the province better than anyone. He showed it in the last election in Ontario. He has the pulse of the people who are there. And if he is saying, I don't want any part of this convoy, I think it's bad stuff, at the very least, Poilievre should be getting closer to him and trying to sort of find some room where he can get a little closer to Ford's message. Otherwise, they're going to repeat the same thing that happened under Andrew Scheer, which is, hey, you did really well in the prairies and you lost the election.
Yeah. Before we go, you mentioned Chrystia Freeland. I saw that you were getting in the muck and mire on Twitter a little bit with your comments on her comments in Washington, D.C. last week. We discussed it on Real Talk on Friday's episode with both Sabria and with the strategist. Essentially, and correct me if you think I'm misrepresenting the Deputy Prime Minister, she told a forum at an event sponsored, or at least a gathering around the IMF, World Bank, that she thought that Africa had not displayed the same commitment to democracy as Ukraine in so many ways as Africans or people in certain African nations had not demonstrated a willingness to fight and die for democracy, and conversations around where the money might go and some African nations perhaps falling into bed with Vladimir Putin's Russia. Your take on the comments, the magnitude of them, how they resonated, and what it means generally speaking for the discussion moving forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure that she said it quite the way you said it, but I think people who are sort of in the development community in Africa have every right to feel frustrated about the attention that Ukraine is getting. I think, in that there are finite dollars out there, dollars that go there are probably getting pulled out of other places, and Africa has traditionally gotten the short end of the stick. So I understand their frustration. I appreciate that she apologized today for her comments and didn't say, I'm sorry you feel offended. She said, I'm sorry, which is a distinction that matters. I'm not sure it's going to have any impact on our politics going forward or anything that's happening in Ukraine, but we do have to be careful not to let sort of our attention on that part of the world distract us from the rest of the world, because there are crises unfolding in other parts of the world, especially with inflation. Inflation that's being driven by what's happening in Ukraine and by Russia's weaponization of its agricultural exports. But we can't be blind to the fact that these countries have to serve their own self-interest. And to just say, well, you should be willing to fight and die for democracy, I think is a little bit of a facile way to look at the situation. And I suspect that the Deputy Prime Minister regrets that she made it as simple as it came off.
You see those drone strikes in Kyiv yesterday? Absolutely wild stuff. It's unbelievable what's happening in Ukraine. We're going to be following that through the course of our coverage this week into next as well. Max, we're always grateful for your time. Keep up the fantastic work as lead columnist at Canada's National Observer. People can check it out and subscribe at nationalobserver.com. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Ryan. Pleasure as always.
Yeah, you bet. Again, you can follow Max on Twitter. Obviously, encourage you to do so. There is never a dull day on Max Fawcett's Twitter timeline, to say the very least. That conversation was presented by our friends at Park Power, who, of course, power our Real Talk RJ hashtag. My friends, it's going to happen. It's inevitable. We're talking about carbon pricing. We're talking about the cost of heating homes and powering families. I mean, costs rise through the winter months. It's a better time now than ever before to get ahead of those rising costs by going to parkpower.ca and comparing what you're paying now for your internet, electricity, and natural gas versus what you could pay with Park Power. They've got the fixed rate, the variable rate, whatever you feel is a better fit for you. You can bundle all your services together like many Real Talkers have done. We heard from Michael yesterday who said, done and done. Congratulations to Michael's household. Putting more money in their pocket, including $70 knocked off their first bill with the promo code 2022-Real Talk at parkpower.ca. Great resources there with frequently asked questions as well. You can learn about the 10% of their profits they plug back into communities. That's right, they support nonprofits as a local utilities provider. How cool is that? We're proud to do business with Park Power. Same goes with Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. If your family's in the market, maybe you're in the market to treat yourself to a new ride, Your old whip has served you well, doesn't owe you anything, but you're not sure it's going to start morning after morning after morning at minus 25? Well, make shopping easier than ever before by visiting Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge online or, of course, in person. You can check out that new Dodge Hornet. They're taking pre-orders right now, and, of course, they're Alberta's best selection when it comes to the 1500, the Dodge Ram, the back-to-back-to-back Motor Trend Truck of the Year. You'll find Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge online under the Sponsors tab on our website, ryanjesperson.com. At Local Environmental Services, it's not just garbage, not to them. Rethink your relationship when you work with Local Environmental Services. They believe communities deserve better, a better service, better prices, and more support for local causes. What does it mean? Well, check out today the Who is Local link at localenvironmental.ca. If you're in business, whether it's a restaurant, maybe it's a small retail location, maybe you're in charge of an entire shopping mall. If you're in charge of garbage and recycling decisions, Local Environmental Services will beat the contract that you're paying right now. They guarantee it. And of course, they sponsor Trash Talk every Friday. Coming up here on the show, you got something to get off your chest? Send us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. You can hear your rant go and blast it out on the Real Talk platform. That's coming up this Friday. And John at Friesen Brothers, 16 Alberta locations across Alberta. People were excited yesterday to hear that you had tracked down and discovered the plant-based Baby Bell cheese.
I'm telling you right now, I put up an Instagram post. It was probably my most responded to post of the entire year.
Is
They're
that
like,
right?
where? I need this now. I said, Friesen Bros, South Side. Go now.
I got emails about it, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. Of course,
It's not just for vegans. Like people, can't eat a lot of dairy, whatever, easy on your stomach. And if it tastes the same, give me 3.
give you 3. Plus, Oktoberfest is back at Friesen Brothers. I wanted to let you know. Available in Stony Plain, Fort Saskatchewan, Drumheller, Hinton Hill. Shout out to Hinton this morning. Peace River, and their Edmonton location, October 29th and 30th. Starting from 4 to 8 p.m., you can experience all of the classic German cuisine that has been part of the Oktoberfest experience for years. It's all at the Friesen Brothers Fresh Market stores. All you can eat. That's how they roll. Dinner with dessert. Details at friesen.com. Well, every Tuesday, our friends at Leading Edge Physiotherapy give us an opportunity to celebrate innovation where we see it in the world around us. It's called the Leading Edge. And in this week's edition, we're featuring a high school student, an award-winning high school student that has captivated those that have heard about her invention, inspired by the story of a Syrian swim instructor that's teaching amputee children how to cope with the trauma of war. Yeah, that's right. This is Meihuam Yu. When she was in grade 10, she heard about this program by Abdul Vahad Nacker, who's working with children who are learning to swim, developing extreme abilities with their feet and their lower limbs to enjoy a new sport, to overcome their challenges. So, Yu wanted to see how she might be able to assist people with disabilities. And so at just 16 years of age, she created a foot-operated computer mouse for people with upper limb disabilities. It's called COAST. That's Computer Operating Assistant System Technology, a shoe pad mouse that's allowing people to access computer technology with their feet. She's 16, everybody. So it's won her the Best Young Inventor Award at the International Invention Innovation Competition in Canada. She says she's got a passion for STEM, for science, tech, engineering, and math, and she says that this is something that she wants to develop as she kicks off her innovation career. She's pointing to the University of Waterloo's additive manufacturing summer program. She's just been accepted there, and now she's shadowing professors to learn how she can turn this invention into reality. She's developed a 3D model. It works with the computer. Now, sky's the limit. This is a remarkable story of a young Canadian making a big impact in the world around her. Meihuam Yu is making computer technology accessible to people that otherwise would experience great challenge. And that's why she's in the spotlight of this week's edition of The Leading Edge, presented by Leading Edge Physiotherapy. Life shouldn't hurt. I love that story.
I do as well. I think I need one of those because I have so many buttons and screens over here. I think that might, if I had a third limb here, it would kind of, no, but that's an amazing invention by so young.
I hear that's what I'm thinking. I'm
Makes
like,
me
when
feel
I was
like I've done nothing with my life when I hear things
when I was
like
16. I mean, we had our parent-teacher interviews last night for our little guy. Glowing reviews, by the way. We were really excited about that. His grade 2 teacher, she said there were some similarities, some commonalities with father and son. She said sometimes he's so enthusiastic to share his ideas. We're teaching him to harness the enthusiasm and to speak at the appropriate times, which is something that we can work on. But that was great. But I remember parent-teacher interviews back in the day. I always had a bit of a pit in my stomach.
Yeah.
I always felt a little bit sick because my parents were going to be brought up to speed on my class clown-like persona in the classroom. And now you hear of 16-year-olds that are developing foot-operated mouse pad or mouses, rather, computer technology for people. And I just go, wow.
So focused.
You imagine when she's 21, 25, 30, 40.
Life-changing, world-changing.
Isn't that incredible?
Coming from the youth. I love it.
Very cool. If you have an invention or an innovation that you would love to see featured on the show, it could be part of the Leading Edge on Tuesday, or maybe it's something that turns into an interview. Maybe we do a full segment on it. We'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. That's exactly what Ron did yesterday. I wanted to give Ron's email a shout out. He says, Jespo and crew, last week, you and Hicks, he says, briefly talked about UFOs. This was an impromptu conversation we had about the supernatural last week. You can check out our Twitter timeline. It's on our Instagram as well and TikTok. But the supernatural, he says, I wanted to share a personal experience with you. He said, August 10 years ago, August of 2012, he says, while my grandmother was visiting, I let my dog out into the backyard. So naturally, my eyes drifted upward. He says, no joke, with Christ as my witness, I saw something moving across the sky. And Ron says, at first I dismissed it as yet another plane. You know, my house was on the takeoff and landing approach for the airport. Until what happened next, Ron says, the object that I saw went straight up, like at a perfect 90-degree angle. He says, now I know it could be dismissed as another plane, and it probably was, but where's the fun in that, says Ron. I swear, on that August night in 2012, I saw a UFO. Now, Ron says, now I know this is a departure of my usual whining about Alberta politics, but I felt like I wanted to share, and I really do hope that when you have a slow news day, no such thing, he says maybe around Halloween, love it, he says you run a special spooky episode. That from Ron. I like the idea.
I do too.
Yeah, so that's something we'll look into.
It's so lucky when you see a UFO, because I've been looking. I'm one of those, like, especially in Alberta here, like I told you, we have the most UFO sightings in all of Canada right here in this province. So
do we have to say alleged UFO sightings, or can we just go with it?
Whatever. I would love to just see a fast moving, I've never seen anything like that. So for someone to just catch it, by luck, when I'm out there like scouring the skies.
Yeah. It's like my paper towel roll story. It's like you don't believe it until you see it. Yeah. You don't believe it until it happens to you. So we're putting out the call. I mean, Ron, we're wide open to doing a fun show on this. Real Talk, we say we're news, politics, and pop culture. We're not just, we're going to talk about the stuff that matters to you, but let's have a little fun as well. So if you're listening to this in your car, if you're listening while you're walking the dog, if you're listening to this at work or at home, and there's a story you have to tell, take some time, put it into an email, and let us know about it. We'd love to hear it as we start the editorial process of putting together a feature here on Real Talk. I don't know if we'll do it for Halloween, but we'll do it. I want to do it in the next. We're gonna look. We're gonna find the best possible guests, and this is something I think that'll be a lot of fun.
What are you gonna be for Halloween? Obviously, you're taking out Wyatt.
For Halloween, it's a big deal for our family, and I always just kind of go along with it. And so there's an idea right now that the family is. There's always a family costume, and if I were to reveal it right now, I would be in serious trouble.
Same.
Yeah. So I don't want to get into it, but it's going to be creative, and we hope that it will capture everyone's attention and inspire everybody to do their own deep costume dive.
Are we dressing up that Friday for the show?
I guess it'll depend who the guest is. Okay. Right? I can't dress up as like Super Mario and then interview the Prime Minister or something like that.
I think I'll be you.
We could dress up as each other.
Wear glasses and a cardigan and come in here.
Yeah, we could. A buddy of mine did dress up as me one Halloween, and he just went around doing T-shirt tosses at the party, and it was kind of a reference for Oilers fans.
We could fade in on the intro of the show, and then boom, it's me.
You host, and then I could, I could try to technically produce. It would be the worst produced Real Talk in history. We'd be knocked off the live stream. The mics wouldn't work. The cameras would be out of focus. It would be a total disaster. Yeah, but that could be fun. We do have a fun holiday edition of Real Talk coming up for our Patreon supporters, so check your email for that.
And
we'll
we have
details
another special show
that.
coming up.
On Friday, you want to say it? You can say
it.
Yeah.
Let's
say it's our 500th episode
it
coming
is
up
our
on Friday.
500th
It's hard to believe.
500
shows, and we'll mark that on Friday. We're still trying to determine exactly how. Probably just a big magnum of champagne. I think that's probably what's going to go down.
Before the show?
Business as usual and a magnum of champagne during it. Either that or maybe selections from the fall blizzard collection at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton in Sherwood Park. What do you think, pal? Maybe I'll roll in, grab you some dairy-free dilly bars. Those are a fan favorite as well at the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Sherwood Park at Baseline Road. By the way, a beautiful facelift at the Baseline Road location. That Dairy Queen, one of the busiest in Canada, and they've taken the necessary steps to ensure your experience there is wonderful. Now, if you want to ensure that on the taste front, take my advice. I had one of these this weekend, the fan favorite, the Pumpkin Pie Blizzard. Hot diggity damn, John. They've nailed it. Real chunks of pumpkin pie, and then, of course, topped with the whipped cream. I tried to make the whipped cream last through the entire blizzard. I just kind of shaved away at it as I took my big heaping spoonfuls. Wyatt, my little guy watching me, goes, "How are you not getting brain freeze?" Which I took as some sort of a judgment on the pace of my consumption.
Or a compliment.
I said, Wyatt, I said, Wyatt, it's melting. I have to eat it quickly. I was hammering that thing back. And I think you might as well. Plus the cinnamon roll blizzard, one worth checking out at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. All right, coming up on tomorrow's show, we got a lot in store. Brandy Morin's going to hang out with us, the award-winning journalist, an Edward R. Murrow Award. She picked it up in New York City. Just an absolutely fierce talent. And then on Thursday, Dr. Jody Carrington. How do we meet in the middle? How do we talk to people we disagree with? How do we pursue healthy debate around family dinner tables as the holidays approach? Plus, on Friday, we're going to get into some interesting polling. Canadians' top political priorities. We'll dig into the numbers coming up on Real Talk.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Kandola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.